Looking uncertain, Musk watched as the hostess glanced at him, then quickly shifted her gaze away, ignoring him as if he were a ghost. A few moments later, the man hesitantly approached a booth, but the waitress, a woman in her 30s with a tired look, shook her head and gestured for him to leave. She didn't say it directly, but the message was clear. "We don't serve your kind here." Musk felt a pang in his chest. He had seen it before in the eyes of the people who passed by him, an indifference that bordered on cruelty. The man hesitated, then slowly walked out, head down. Musk could see the anger and hurt in his eyes, but there was no one to hear his silent protest. The restaurant continued to buzz with conversation as if nothing had happened. Musk turned his attention back to the table where he sat, his mind racing with what he had just witnessed. But as he looked around, he saw a young woman seated at a table nearby, eating alone. Her eyes caught his for a moment, and she smiled softly, offering a slight nod. This was different. She saw him, or at least she acknowledged him. Later, as Musk sipped his coffee, the waitress from earlier approached, her demeanor unchanged. She asked if he needed anything else, her tone professional but distant. Musk nodded and thanked her, but as she walked away, he couldn't help but feel the stark difference in how he was treated compared to the other patrons. It was subtle, but it was there, a sense of being ignored, minimized, or even feared. Throughout the afternoon, he observed the interactions around him. There were moments of kindness, of course, patrons offering to pay for a meal, a stranger giving a few dollars, a hand extended when it was needed most. But these moments were fleeting, lost in a sea of judgment and discomfort. The homeless were often seen as a nuisance, an inconvenience. Even the staff, while polite, seemed to treat them as though they were invisible. Elon Musk realized that this was the reality of living on the streets. It wasn't just the struggle for food, warmth, or safety. It was the constant battle against being dehumanized. The kindness he witnessed was rare, and the cruelty was often masked in the form of indifference. People who lived on the streets were treated as if they didn't matter, as if they were nothing more than a burden on society. As the day wore on, Musk couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a social experiment. It was a lesson in human nature. The struggle of the homeless wasn't just about survival in a physical sense. It was a fight for dignity, for recognition, and for humanity in a world that often preferred to look away. In that moment, Musk knew that his experiment had only just begun. There was much more to learn, much more to witness, but for now he was left with one haunting thought. The homeless were not just struggling to survive, they were fighting to be seen. Elon Musk continued his undercover journey, blending into the sea of unnoticed faces in the restaurant. What began as a simple experiment to understand life as a homeless person had begun to reveal more than he had anticipated. As he sat there day after day, he encountered a variety of characters, each interaction adding layers of complexity to his understanding of the world he was trying to infiltrate. One afternoon, while sitting at his usual corner table, a middle-aged man with a weary expression approached him. The man looked like he'd seen his fair share of hardship. His clothes were slightly cleaner than Musk's, but there was a similar aura of defeat in his demeanor. He stood at the counter for a long time, nervously eyeing the staff. Musk watched him. His curiosity piqued. After a few moments, the man shuffled over to the bar and sat on one of the stools, avoiding eye contact with anyone. A waitress, a young woman named Sarah, came over to take his order. Her smile was polite, but there was something cold in her voice. She didn't seem to care about the man's struggles, only treating him as just another customer to serve. "What can I get you?" she asked. The man hesitated, his voice shaking. "I'll take a water, please." "Just water?" Sarah responded, raising an eyebrow. There was a moment of awkward silence before she turned away to get his drink. Musk couldn't help but overhear the exchange. It wasn't the words themselves, but the way they were delivered, indifferent, almost dismissive. He could feel the tension between the man and the waitress, the unspoken judgment. It was a small moment, but it resonated with him deeply. Later that afternoon, Musk overheard an even more disturbing conversation while pretending to be absorbed in his coffee. Two restaurant employees, a cook and a server, were talking in hushed tones behind the kitchen door. Musk strained to hear their words, and what he caught was chilling. The server, a young man with a scruffy beard, was venting about the restaurant's policies. "You know, they're making us get rid of any..." Elon Musk had always been known for his innovation, his bold ideas, and his drive to challenge the status quo. But on this particular day, he had a very different kind of experiment in mind. One that would push him far out of his comfort zone. He wanted to understand firsthand what it felt like to be homeless, not from a distance, but by experiencing it himself. Musk's decision to go undercover as a homeless person wasn't made lightly. He had long been an advocate for social change, and he often talked about creating a better world. But what did it really mean to be part of society's invisible class? How were the homeless treated? And how did they survive day to day? To truly understand, he had to see it with his own eyes, feel it in his own skin. After weeks of preparation, Musk was ready. He began by purchasing secondhand clothes from local thrift shops, worn-out jeans, a faded jacket, a pair of weathered sneakers, and a few old hats. He avoided anything too clean or obvious, opting for a look that would blend in rather than stand out. His goal was to make it as difficult as possible for anyone to recognize him. He also changed his demeanor. He practiced slouching, adopting a more closed-off posture, and intentionally avoided eye contact with people. He needed to be invisible in plain sight. Musk had hired a small team to help him with logistics, but they were to remain completely out of sight. His mission was to go alone without the comfort of his usual entourage or security. He didn't want any special treatment. He wanted to experience what a person without privilege might go through, day in and day out. The first day of his experiment was the hardest. When Musk walked into a busy city restaurant, he immediately felt the sting of judgment. His unkempt appearance seemed to make the other patrons uncomfortable. A glance from one person, a whisper from another. They didn't know his true identity, but it didn't matter. They saw what they wanted to see, a homeless man. Musk tried to ignore the looks, but the weight of their stares was almost suffocating. He sat at a corner table, hoping to blend in, but it wasn't easy. A waitress, probably in her early 20s, gave him a quick, almost dismissive glance before approaching. "What can I get you?" she asked, her tone flat, not unkind, but certainly distant. Musk ordered a cup of coffee, trying to keep his voice steady, to not reveal the nerves that were crawling under his skin. As he sat there, he observed the other patrons. Many of them seemed oblivious to him, engrossed in their own worlds. But a few gave him looks, some with pity, others with judgment. He overheard conversations about the latest celebrity gossip, business trends, and personal problems. But no one seemed to notice the man in the corner. He was invisible to them, just another face in the crowd. It was strange. Here he was, Elon Musk, a man worth billions. Yet he had become no one. He was a part of a faceless crowd, a person who didn't matter. This was the first taste of the harshness of being homeless. People didn't see you. They didn't care. Musk's heart ached as he sat there drinking his coffee in silence. This wasn't a test of his physical endurance, it was a test of his humanity. Could he survive this kind of existence? Would anyone care if he disappeared? And more importantly, why did he feel this kind of isolation? As the day went on, Musk was forced to face what so many people who lived on the streets experienced every single day, the struggle to be seen as human. And he hadn't even started his deeper investigation yet. But this, the feeling of being a stranger in the crowd, was something he would never forget. This was just the beginning of his journey, but already he was beginning to understand the true weight of his experiment. It would be far harder than he had ever imagined. Elon Musk sat quietly in the corner of the restaurant, trying to maintain a low profile. Dressed in his worn-out clothes and with his unkempt appearance, he felt like a stranger to the world he had once navigated with ease. This wasn't the world of billion-dollar deals and flashy presentations. No, this was the world of survival, the world of the homeless. And for the first time, Musk was a part of it. The restaurant was busy, a popular spot for both locals and tourists. As Musk observed his surroundings, he couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the other patrons and himself. Families gathered at large tables, businessmen and women discussed meetings over coffee, and groups of friends laughed over shared meals. But in the corner, tucked away from the rest of the crowd, was Musk, unnoticed, blending in as one of the invisible. It didn't take long for him to notice the subtle differences in how the homeless were treated. A man, not unlike Musk in appearance, entered the restaurant. His clothes were ragged, his face weathered by the streets. He made his way to the counter, standing near the entrance. "Homeless people who come in," he muttered. "It's bad for business, they say. Doesn't matter if they're just looking for a place to sit or if they're hungry. We're supposed to ignore them. Just pretend they're not here." The cook, a burly man with tattoos creeping out of his sleeves, nodded in agreement. "It's messed up, man. But what can we do? It's the owner's rules. If we don't follow them, we're out. No questions asked." Musk's stomach tightened. This was not just a restaurant with an indifference to the homeless, it was a place actively discouraging any form of kindness to those in need. The idea that employees were expected to treat people as invisible, to turn away anyone who didn't fit the image of a paying customer, was appalling. Musk knew that many restaurants had policies against loitering, but this went beyond that. It was a systematic rejection of human decency in favor of profit. Later, as he sat there processing what he had overheard, he saw Sarah, the waitress, approach the man who had ordered just a water earlier. She had a tray in her hands, and she placed it in front of him with a forced smile. Musk watched as the man glanced at the tray. On it, there was a half-eaten sandwich. The man looked confused, unsure of what to do. "Compliments of the chef," Sarah said flatly, her eyes not meeting his. Musk's heart sank. The sandwich wasn't free. It was just a way for the staff to get rid of the man without having to actually serve him a full meal. It was a subtle form of charity, but one that came with a bitter sting. The man, grateful yet humiliated, took the sandwich and began eating quietly, not making a fuss. Elon Musk sat back, feeling a wave of frustration wash over him. The restaurant was not only treating the homeless with indifference, but it was also cultivating an environment where employees were forced to disregard their basic humanity for the sake of profit. There was no room for kindness, no space for empathy. As the day wore on, Musk couldn't shake the feeling that the true nature of the restaurant, and perhaps society at large, was far darker than he had initially imagined. It wasn't just the way the homeless were treated, it was the way the system worked, perpetuating a cycle of neglect and invisibility. The deeper he dug, the more uncomfortable the truth became. In this hidden corner of society, where people were pushed aside and forgotten, Musk realized that his undercover mission had uncovered far more than he had anticipated. The battle for human dignity wasn't just about survival, it was about confronting the systems that allowed such treatment to persist. And that was a truth that Musk would carry with him long after the experiment was over. Elon Musk had spent weeks in the restaurant, immersed in his experiment, trying to understand life from the perspective of the homeless. As he blended into the background, his observations had slowly begun to paint a troubling picture, one that went beyond the surface level of simple neglect. Now something deeper was beginning to take shape, and it was starting to unravel the very fabric of what he had once considered a straightforward business. It all began one rainy evening. The restaurant had grown quieter as the night wore on, and the usual bustle had given way to a more somber atmosphere. Musk sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as he tried to make sense of everything he had witnessed: the subtle cruelties, the systemic indifference, the unspoken rules that governed the treatment of people like him, people who were, in essence, invisible. As he sat there lost in thought, the man he had seen earlier, an older, weathered figure who often came in just to drink water, approached his usual spot. This time, though, he wasn't alone. There was an air of urgency about him, a look of determination in his eyes. He was speaking to Sarah, the waitress who had been one of the few people to acknowledge his presence in the restaurant. Musk had noticed her kindness, though it had always been laced with discomfort. Musk couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "Sarah, I need your help," the man said in a low voice, looking around nervously. "I've been watching. There's something wrong with the restaurant. People don't just vanish like this, they're being taken by someone on the inside." Sarah looked shocked but quickly regained her composure. "What are you talking about?" she asked, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "You can't just say things like that, people will think you're crazy." "I'm not crazy," the man insisted, his voice growing more desperate. "I've seen it happen. You know about the workers who disappear at night, don't you? Some of them are being taken in the back off the books. The owners, they're hiding it, they're making money off it. And they're using people like me to cover it up." Musk's heart raced. He had heard whispers, hints of things happening behind closed doors, but nothing had ever been this clear. This wasn't just about a restaurant's treatment of the homeless. It was about a much larger, darker system that had its hands in the very heart of the business. The man continued, "They tell us we're not allowed to sit here, not allowed to be seen. But there's a bigger story. They're exploiting the homeless for cheap labor, sending us off to work in places no one can track us. And when we're done, when we're no longer useful, they make us disappear. Sarah was silent for a moment, her face pale. You can't prove that. You'll get yourself hurt. I've seen it happen, the man said firmly. And now I'm telling you, you have to know it's bigger than you think. As the conversation continued, Musk felt a cold chill run down his spine. The pieces began to fall into place. The treatment of the homeless was not just about indifference, it was about exploitation. The restaurant, and perhaps even others in the city, were part of a hidden network that used people in the margins of society as disposable labor, often without their knowledge or consent. Those who were seen as nothing more than a nuisance to the business world were being secretly forced into a system that kept them dependent and hidden from view. Musk sat there, stunned, as the realization hit him like a tidal wave. This was not just about societal neglect. It was about a deliberate system of abuse. The restaurant was a small cog in a much larger machine that preyed on those with no voice, no power, and no way of escaping. The man, sensing that the conversation was over, gave Sarah a final look. You can't unhear this, he said, and with that he turned and walked out into the rain, disappearing into the night. Musk sat frozen in his seat. The revelation was too profound, too unsettling. He had come into this experiment seeking to understand what it meant to be homeless, but what he had uncovered was something far darker. It wasn't just about being treated like a nobody. It was about being controlled, used, and discarded by a system that thrived on the suffering of the most vulnerable. His experiment had revealed the truth, but it also left him with a deeper question. What would he do with this knowledge? How could he expose a truth this dark without becoming part of the very system he had been investigating? The stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined, and Musk knew he was standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than he had initially thought. Elon Musk had thought he was uncovering the darkest secrets of the homeless community, of how they were treated by society, and of the restaurant business's role in exploiting the vulnerable. But as his investigation deepened, the lines between truth and deception began to blur. His perception of the world he had stepped into, of the people, the system, and the experiment itself, was about to change forever. It was a rainy evening when the twist began to reveal itself. Musk was sitting in his usual spot, nursing his coffee, his mind still reeling from the revelation he had overheard earlier, the exploitation of the homeless. He hadn't yet figured out what to do with this information, how to expose the system without getting caught in its web. But little did he know, the people around him had already started to piece together his true identity. He had been cautious. He had made sure to blend in, speak as little as possible, and avoid drawing attention to himself. But as the evening wore on, something in the air felt different. The usual indifference that had accompanied his interactions with the staff seemed to shift. There were subtle glances exchanged between the employees, and Musk began to notice that the waitress, Sarah, kept looking over at him in a way that seemed knowing. Suddenly, as if on cue, the manager of the restaurant, a stern-looking woman named Rebecca, approached him. She stood in front of his table, arms crossed, a knowing look in her eyes. "You've been very quiet these past few weeks," Rebecca said, her voice calm but firm. "You've been playing your role well." Musk's heart skipped a beat. He tried to maintain his composure, but his mind raced. How could she possibly know? Had his cover been blown? "You're not fooling anyone, Mr. Musk," Rebecca continued, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You think you've been undercover, but we've known who you are from the very beginning." Musk's breath caught in his throat. He was speechless, unsure of how to respond. He had spent all this time living as a homeless man, trying to understand their struggles, but now it seemed like everything he had done was part of a much bigger game. Rebecca leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "We've been watching you just as much as you've been watching us. The truth is, the system you've been investigating, it's not just a corporate scheme. It's something far more personal to you than you could have imagined." Musk felt his blood run, cold. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice shaky. "You think this is just about the homeless, about society's neglect, But you've been caught in a trap you never saw coming. Your own family has a hand in it. Musk's mind raced. His thoughts swirled like a storm. His family? How could his family be involved in something like this? Rebecca continued, "Your father, Elon, he was part of the very system you've been investigating. His investments, his connections. He's been complicit in creating this network of exploitation. The homeless aren't just victims here. They've been part of a larger scheme to control, to use people like pawns in a game they don't even understand." Musk felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. His own family, the very people he trusted, had been involved in a web of manipulation and abuse. The restaurant wasn't just a place he had been investigating. It was part of a network that connected to his past, his legacy, and his deepest fears. "You're not the first to stumble upon this," Rebecca said, her tone almost sympathetic. "But you're the first to realize how close to home it really is." As Musk sat there, stunned and overwhelmed, the pieces finally fell into place. Everything he had learned, everything he had uncovered, had led him to this moment. The homeless weren't just victims of society. They were part of a much larger, more insidious system that reached into the highest echelons of power. His own family, his own history, had been tainted by it. The shocking twist wasn't just the exploitation of the homeless. It was the fact that the system he had been investigating was intertwined with his own life in ways he couldn't have imagined. And now, with this revelation, Musk was forced to confront the truth that the world he had been trying to change might have been shaped by the very people he trusted the most. The experiment was no longer just about understanding homelessness. It was about understanding his own place in a world that had been built on secrets, manipulation, and betrayal. And the hardest part? Realizing that his own family had been one of the architects of the system he sought to destroy. Elon Musk's undercover mission, which began with a simple desire to understand the plight of the homeless, led him down an unexpected and eye-opening path. What he initially thought was an investigation into societal neglect and exploitation quickly morphed into something far more profound, revealing systemic issues that were intricately tied to his own life. At first, Musk immersed himself in the world of the homeless, observing their struggles, the cruelty they faced, and the indifferent treatment they received from society. Through his disguise, he witnessed firsthand the emotional and psychological toll of being invisible, ignored by the very people and systems that were meant to help. The restaurant, where he spent much of his time, became a microcosm for the larger societal problems he was investigating. It wasn't just about the lack of resources for the homeless. It was about a deep-seated, systemic indifference that permeated every level of society. Musk realized that the issue wasn't just one of survival. It was about being seen, about maintaining dignity in a world that often forgot you existed. As Musk's time undercover stretched on, he uncovered a much darker side to the restaurant business. He overheard conversations that hinted at something more sinister: employees being exploited, people disappearing under suspicious circumstances, and a network of hidden labor that operated just below the surface of the restaurant's everyday operations. This was not merely a reflection of a cold-hearted business. It was part of a larger systemic exploitation that used the vulnerable as disposable tools. The people he encountered, those dismissed as unimportant, were being used and discarded by the very system that profited off of their suffering. Musk's growing awareness of this hidden reality sparked a profound sense of injustice within him. But the most shocking moment came when Musk realized that this was no longer just about exposing a corrupt system. It was about confronting a reality far closer to home. The revelation that his own family, particularly his father, had been a part of the network of exploitation he had been investigating, shattered everything Musk thought he understood. It was no longer a distant problem, or something he could fight from the outside. It was personal. The system he had been investigating was tied directly to his own legacy, his own connections, and the people he had trusted most in his life. The truth was not just about exposing the flaws of society. It was about confronting the ways in which his own family had contributed to those flaws. In the end, Musk's experiment was not just a journey into the heart of homelessness. It was a journey into the heart of a system that was built on secrets, power, and manipulation. The revelation that his own family had been complicit in these actions was a bitter pill to swallow. and it forced him to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about the world, about his family, and about his own role in shaping society's future. What began as an experiment in empathy turned into a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about his own privilege, power, and the systems that allowed injustice to thrive. The story of Musk's undercover mission serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the truths we seek to expose are the ones we least expect. The lines between right and wrong blur in a world driven by greed and indifference, and those who are vulnerable are often caught in the crossfire. But it also shows that true change begins when we are willing to confront the uncomfortable realities of our own lives, and when we use the power we have to challenge the systems that perpetuate injustice. For Musk, the real journey had just begun.